Gothic fair. I love you. Those were the words that was the good saying that she kept hearing over and over again within her own mind, wherein they stayed the words ever cunning, ever deceitful, ever falsehood. Of course, therein they would stay lying in wait for her to return to her home, wherein they would surely become something ever the more terrible. Of course, yet that is where they remained, with no way to leave her inescapable prison of a, though it did not matter. And as she thought, she found that her thoughts were such that she could not stand, and that she must sit, so she did sit, in fact, and there on a small park bench in the middle of a fairground, or rather on the outskirts of one, she did find herself, the night air creeping past her bare shoulders, as she had not brought with her a jacket or any sort of overclothing. In fact, the light next to her did shine down just past her, only barely illuminating her otherwise darkened body. And the night air was stiff and chilled, still as a corpse, still as she was, ever the saddened, as she was there, awaiting nothing, awaiting the quiet that her own mind could not even, allow her to conceive of. She was a sorry sight. It was some time, but eventually, though not before she was ready to return to her home, wherein she would squander her sadness on a pillow, weeping tears for no one, or for someone long past and gone. Eventually someone did approach her as she sat, 3 tears streaming down her cold, pale face. Her hair, black as the night was, and barely visible, did not budge, and neither did she as the boy next to her did now sit. Perhaps it was his ease, perhaps it was his speech, she did not know, but for whatever reason she did not at first find herself comfortable around him, and as he began to speak, it was quite apparent why. She looked away as if ready to leave, though she had no intentions of moving. If he was there to do her harm, she would let him, she thought, and be better for it, as she could not bring herself to care about herself, not in that moment, not there in her thoughts ever pressing. Until she heard him say it, strangely enough, the saying, the words which ever ruined, which did destroy her waking thoughts and wakened her sleeping nightmares. Until he said the words, I love you. She looked over and up to him abruptly. Excuse me, she said quietly, some fear in her voice, which shook but slightly. The boy shrugged, and it was apparent that he did not care, or perhaps that he was acting as if what he had said had been perfectly valid. Is that strange of me to say? He asked. He was roughly her age, maybe a little bit older, perhaps younger. She could not tell in the dark there with the little light available. He was handsome, she could tell, though perhaps not in the conventional sense, and of course she found herself somewhat drawn to him, but withdrawn she did yet feel in her saddened state, and again she looked down at her own feet, and thought to herself that she would have been better off never having been born. But he said it again, I love you. This time she could not help herself, her thoughts ever pressing. Why do you say that? She asked it, her voice shaking. The boy yet shrugged. Do I not have the right to say what it is I feel? You do not, she said, on the verge of tears. Not in the middle of the night with me sitting here like I am. He shrugged again. I suppose that I don't care. She looked away. Just do whatever it is you're going to do to me. The boy smiled, though not maliciously, and he looked at her through sad eyes, a look of compassion and pity. He said nothing. She noticed the look on his face, and she shrugged away, looking away, trying to wipe away a tear. She shook her head quite quickly and said, I don't know you. Please leave me here. Do you want to know me? He asked sincerely. No, she answered quickly, shaking her head. Then I'll leave, he said, again with a shrug. I am sorry to have disturbed you. The boy stood to leave, though as he began to walk away, she looked up at his back, watching, and said beneath her breath, Wait. The boy stopped, turning to the side, and grinned ever so slightly, the same look of compassion and sadness creeping into his eyes. I'll go, he said. I'll go now. He nodded. She shook her head. Just stay, she said, shaking her head. Please. Because you asked so nicely, he said, tilting his head slightly to the right and sighing, trying to produce some sort of humor. He sat back down upon the bench. There was silence for a few moments. She could tell that the boy had not taken his eyes off of her, that he was staring right at her, and yet afraid she stared forward, attempting not to look at him, as if her averted gaze could drive him from seeing her, but it could not, and he saw her for who she was, completely, or close enough. She hated him for it. She could feel the anger coming up within her, boiling beneath the surface, but she too was sad. She was too sad in her sad state, in her saddened state. She was yet too pressed for words, too pressed for anger, and shouting and fighting, and she could not bring herself to become angry towards this boy. And then he said it. I love you. She looked over at him. You don't know me. He did not seem to care, and he said nothing more. Instead, he scooted closer to her and put his arm around her shoulders. Now he broke his stare and, pointing with his other hand, indicated the lights of the fair which in this distance stood, and the Ferris wheel which did yet turn, standing still. As he looked upon it, pointing, he whispered something to her, and she was not sure that he heard him correctly, that he would ask her of all people, do you not want to be up there? She looked up at him, somewhat confused. Up where? He shrugged. Do you not see what I'm pointing at? She shrugged back, still looking up upon his face. I see you. He smiled that same sad smile. Come with me. To the Ferris wheel? Up, he said. And sure, he mentioned. Up to the Ferris wheel. She looked at him more intently, and then burying her face into his chest, she began to cry. What is your name? She asked, sobbing. His name was Winchester, and she did love him.